All right, welcome back. So to close up this conversation, we want you to be part of this conversation. So if you're watching from home, please feel free to call in. The numbers rather, are at the bottom of your screen. Let me start with you, Adera, with the aspect of perhaps now how Kenyans can be able to tell a true licensed pharmaceutical from the quacks in the industry.
Yeah, one is that currently the board has given the green banners. That are available in almost all, not all, almost all registered outlets. Number two is that the practice and the premise license are well displayed in the facility. As you enter into the pharmacy, you should be able to see the license clearly displayed on the wall. Then number three, like Jesse has said, as a professional, you must be, as a Kenyan, you must be able to request to be served by a professional. So as you go into that pharmacy, you've seen the banner, you've seen the license clearly displayed, then ask to be served by a professional. Number two is that we have clearly standards on how a pharmacy should look like. So if you walk into Kibera and you find a pharmacy that looks like a butchery or looks like a shop with no clear arrangement of medicines, with no clear shelving,
it raises alarm.
It raises alarm. That tells you that this has not been inspected. It has not been approved by the regulator. Number four is the location of these facilities. You'll find pharmacies that are located within estates, deep into where people stay. Again, you realize that these are people who will close their pharmacies until late in the evening, up to around 8. Then they open at 8:30 to midnight. That tells you this person is not qualified. That is why he doesn't want to open during the day, to avoid the regulator and the authorities then open at night to sell to the unsuspecting Kenyans. And the benefit that Kenyans have today is that anytime you spot a pharmacy that you have issues with, you have doubt, you can clearly report to the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Jesse, and help us understand apparel products. You mentioned it.
Yeah, apparel products are products that, in every market there is a holder of a license holder for whichever product. So apparel products are brought by an agent who is not the license holder. Once they have seen the gap that these products are needed in this market, I'm not the product holder, and they can't be able to access them. There is a way that the board gives a go-ahead for them to be brought in. Now, the confusion that there is in the market is when they come in, the license holder for that product does not know they are in. The sellers out there look at them and they see this is the same product. So the confusion we have is that's where now the counterfeit comes in, because the practitioner does not know whether is this a legitimate parallel imported product or is it a counterfeit. And I think the regulator ought to flash those numbers. They ought to know that this batch of the product is coming in as parallel and it is legitimate. These other batches, we don't know about them. And because we don't know about them, then we can as well lump them out there as counterfeit.
Gentlemen, the other aspect that also perhaps is a challenge to the pharmaceutical industry is pricing. Now, Kenyans will, of course, go for a cheaper products, right? How do we deal with the aspect of pricing control when it comes to drugs here in Kenya? Of course, you don't want then the drugs too expensive then again, but and because expensive drugs means then counterfeit drugs will be more of a success because they're cheaper and more affordable. So how do we begin to control that pricing?
I think this probably would come in as within the confines of self-regulations. Apart from that, then the route of bringing in parallel products basically helps to mitigate against the price variances that is becoming a burden to the Kenyans. Because if a product through a marketing authority holder is costing so much money and it can be brought in through parallel routes, and then it will be available at a fraction of that price, then that begins to make sense. But again, this is a market where the prices are not controlled. So because prices are not controlled, it would be left to the whims of the product owners. And I think this would be an appeal to importers, that they begin to look at Kenyans not as a business group, just where we bring in products for profit, but to begin to look at Kenyans as people who need to be sustained. It's a market. If you don't give products at prices that can be afforded by your customers, then you end up losing them. You lose them, one, either to the parallel, you lose them to the fake, and you actually, in the long term, you also end up losing them to the generics, because we have had a discussion before with one of the multinational companies around, and narrowing in on one product. They said this product, which is available at well over 500 Kenyan shillings, can be made available at a tenth of that price. Now, why the variance? Why the variance? Because then at that higher price, they sell to just a clique of Kenyans, and they don't basically market. They don't actually look at the mass market. So there should be an aspect of having access. Right. So access programs should be encouraged, and they should not only be encouraged to the public sector. We need to have access programs and being also spread out to the private sector, because as we are today, we have more pharmacies in the private sector than in the public sector.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have one caller, Jack Muraya, calling from Kapsabet, rather. I'd love to hear your thoughts or your questions to the gentleman in studio. Go ahead.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Fine, fine.
Yes, your contribution to the conversation?
Okay, pero hivi.
Yes.
Daktari amesema usiwe kumeza dawa hawa utakuwa addicted. Okay. So kuna mtu anaandikiwa kumeza dawa kwa hospitali. Sema kama yeye diabetes. Huyo ako sawa?
Rudia hiyo swali tena tafadhali.
Okay, ni wanauliza.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Kuna ule mtu ameandikiwa kumeza na daktari. Kama ule mtu ako na diabetes, mwingine ni pressure. Huyo ako sawa kuendelea kumeza ama iko shida kwake?
All right. Yes, just you.
Yeah, for chronic conditions, I mean, there are conditions that once you're diagnosed with, you have to be on maintenance for the rest of your life, unless and until God intervenes. Now, conditions like diabetes, hypertension, and other related conditions basically are such that you'll be put on medication for life. So for that kind of a person, akosawa, aendelee kutumia dawa yake, let him not skip a day, because once you skip a day, the blood sugars will begin to misbehave, and sometimes you end up being hospitalized. So for that one, I mean, the area that we are worried about for addictive tendencies are the acute medications, the medicines that you get over the counter. That's, I think, where there's a major problem.
Okay, Adira, your contribution?
Yeah, maybe back on the costing.
Yes, the pricing.
Yeah, the pricing of the medicine. I think and still believe that the government has a role, and especially now that we are talking about UHC. The government should make the investing environment friendly. Some of these people that are manufacturing these medicines from India, from China, can start investing in Kenya and have these medicines locally done, and that will cut the cost drastically. And number two, currently the most unfortunate thing is that we are importing drugs that are locally made, and It is because we've not built the capacity of our local manufacturing companies. So it is time that we encourage our local pharmaceutical companies to start doing drugs on the ARVs, the anti-diabetics, the antihypertensives. They have the capacity to do that.
And Adera, I'm glad you brought in that international aspect, because the other problem is that the language, especially in a lot of these drugs, it's not in English, it's not in Kiswahili. So there's that language barrier as well. How do we begin to handle that, especially those drugs are coming from outside the country?
That is a very interesting scenario, and it's something that have just begun happening, I guess maybe because of parallel importation, because when drugs are done, they're done for specific geographical markets.
Yes.
So if a drug was done for China and it ends up in Kenya, it will come with the Chinese language. If it was meant for Turkey, and it ends up in Kenya, it will end up with that Turkish language.
So what is the solution that perhaps the Pharmaceutical Association should table?
The solution is this, and this goes back to the regulator, that when these medicines come to the country in whatever form, whether they come through the registered importers or through parallel importation, one is that we must make sure that those who are going to dispense these products understand the language.
Right.
Because how do I give a medicine to the client done in a language that the client does not understand?
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Moses Wanjala, you're calling in from Nakuru. Moses, good morning. What's your contribution or your question to the conversation?
Hello.
Hello.
Habari.
Mzuri sana, habari yako?
Poa sana.
Aya, niambie, what's your contribution to the conversation?
Nilikuwa nataka kuhiti
Moses, are you still there? All right, we seem to have lost the link with Moses. Perhaps we'll see if we can get him back. But yes, Adera, back to the conversation. So what the regulator needs to do is to make sure wherever these drugs are coming from, that now the language on the prescription is now user-friendly to the Kenyan market.
Yeah, the language on the literature, the labeling and the literature, and that also goes to our partners, the donors. When you're donating medicines to Kenyans, donate medicines that are done in languages that we understand. Don't bring medicines and dump them in Kenya in form of donations when they are done in languages that the prescribers don't understand. The pharmacy people who are to dispense them and advise the patients do not understand, and even the final consumer do not understand, because you'll be doing a lot of injustice to the clients. So the regulator must, at the point of application for this drug to come into the country, want to go through all the specs, just to understand that it is done in a language that is well understood by the Kenyan public. It is coming in formulations that are acceptable in Kenya. And the other thing is that when a drug is done for China, you'll realize that temperatures in China are different from temperatures in Kenya. So those drugs are done, and the shelf life and storage conditions are based on which destination are these products meant for. So if you divert the country of destination, then you'll also start experiencing challenges with storage, challenges with transportation, and even challenges with now the dispensing. So there is a bigger aspect that the regulator needs to start approaching this agenda of having different routes of making drugs come in. Yes, it cuts on the cost, it makes medicines accessible, but how do we assure Kenyans that with all these routes open, we'll not end up with the same mess we had with sugar, where sugar came from this end, this end, this end, then all of a sudden we're being told sugar has mercury, one has lead, one has copper. How do we make sure that all the routes are regulated so that the products that come meet our needs? We don't want to have drugs in our country that do not meet our needs. They were meant for somebody else, but for other reasons, they ended up in Kenya. That may not address or solve our problems as a country.
I'm glad you brought in the aspect of shelf life, which perhaps even I personally didn't think of it, that some drugs are created for different regions with a specific climate in mind.
Sure.
So then what is the right way, if there is a right way, especially with Kenya's weather, to preserve drugs, especially those drugs perhaps that a lot of parents have in their homes just in case the child starts coughing? Adele.
I think we want to encourage parents to open mini pharmacies at home let me start from that. That it is not fair to open a mini pharmacy at home because you're actually presenting your family, you're putting them at risk. Once the kids know this medicine is sweet, because they only know them from taste, they would actually get them and use them when you're not there. And the cases of overdose will probably come in. I would encourage them to take whatever is not used back to the pharmacies in their neighborhoods for safe disposal. However, the shelf lives basically is the number of days that a product can stay stable and still be used for the label claim. If for most of the products that are mixed, they come in forms of powder, for example. So the seal is broken and is mixed out there, and then you're given. There's usually clear instructions. There are those that needs to be stored under refrigeration after they are mixed. But again, even before they are mixed, all these products are meant to be stored under some conditions. One, if they are sensitive to light, you'll be told keep away from direct light.
Okay.
If they are sensitive to heat, the temperatures basically will be available. I think a good pharmacist, a good pharmacy professional out there would tell you how to store your products.
For the sake of time, allow me to have our viewers ask the last question. Daniel Mokaya, you're calling in from Thika. What's your contribution to the conversation?
Nilikuwa nauliza saa hizi tumepata kwetu clinics na madawa mengi yamesambazwa ovyo. Na hiyo sasa imeleta shida kwa sababu serikali wakati mwingine iliahidi madawa itakuwa kwa mahospitali. Lakini haya madawa yakikosekana kwa mahospitali, hiyo imeleta hiyo shida tena unaenda kwa hospitali unaambiwa waenda ununue dawa. Sasa hii kununua dawa na hao watu wamekuwa linzi wanauza madawa, at the time you can get the wrong medication.
Okay, so you're worried about misdiagnosis? Okay. Adela, I'll let you have that last question where you, Daniel is critically worried about that, where you go and you're given the wrong kind of medicine.
Yeah, because the perception is that they are safe in the public facilities.
These government facilities.
Yeah. And if they don't get those medicine from the facility, then they are pushed to buying, and they are not sure about who is serving them out there.
And the aspect of now misdiagnosis.
Yeah, and misdiagnosis. So my point, I'll still go back to my original point, that within your locality, identify a professional, identify an outlet where you can walk into comfortably and identify with the person serving you, because for one is qualified and the facility is licensed, and somebody who can take responsibility for whatever that happens to your family. Let that person be like your family pharmacist or family pharmaceutical technologist, that you can walk there every time you have a question. This is a person that you'll go there and tell you that, Patrick, for this you don't need a medicine. You just need to go and relax, get a cup of coffee, and you be healed. But again, when we talk of issues of quacks, I also want to address the government, because as much as we focus so much on unqualified people dispensing medicines outside the government facilities, how many pharmacy professionals do we have in government facilities? With devolution, we've created so many dispensaries, so many health centers that do not have pharmacy people in these facilities who are dispensing medicines, who are counseling patients.
So that's a big question.
Big question to the government.
All right, gentlemen, allow us to close up the conversation right there. Thank you guys so much for coming out and helping us also understand the pharmaceutical world and answering a lot of the questions from our viewers. And of course, as always, you, our viewers, for tuning into the conversation and contributing to it. We thank you so much. I will see you at around 1 p.m. for a quick update of stories making headlines within our lunchtime bulletin. But at 11 a.m., our Sunday political show with Ben Kitili starts. Stay with us. Bye-bye.